Uh, Welcome everyone here on campus, and for those of you who are joining us online, welcome to you. And my name is Ricky Neath. I am the course director for the Interactive Media Usability and Design course in DAD here at Full Sail University. Yep. And here help me welcome our panelists. We have Anthony Colangelo. He's an iOS developer at Big Cartel. Yay! Okay. And we have here Stephen Rivas, senior full stack engineer at Netflix.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And in the middle here, we have Eric Van Holtz, senior front end developer at Push. Yeah. All right, today we're going to be talking about scale like you mean it, the best practices for responsive web design. So I'll start off by asking our panelists to explain what is responsive design.
Who wants it?
Oh, do I get to go first? Do we have to answer in order again? I asked this last time too. I'm not exactly sure how to. I don't know what to do with my hands either. So. Responsive web design, in my understanding of it, is just a way for your content to be presented on multiple screen sizes and devices in a way that's a little more appropriate for what the user may be able to do on any given device. If you're on a desktop application, it may make sense to have like a top navigation that kind of extends across the screen and like lots of little cute little drop-down things. But when you put that onto a mobile phone and you're having to scroll sideways and back and forth to get to all of these access points, it stopped making sense to the users, and we have to kind of think about how the page design and layout is going to present that so that they're able to effectively do what they want, the same efficiency that they would want to achieve on a desktop, but on their phone.
Okay. Yeah, a lot about readability, accessibility, making sure the layout makes sense, as well as like the content too, because if you're on a mobile device, you might not need as much information that you could get on the desktop version.
Okay. What are some of the best practices that you see out there in terms of key elements that we can think of, maybe tools that you use on a day-to-day basis that you could share with us that will help some of those things that you spoke about earlier on?
So we were talking about this a little bit before the panel. The workhorse of responsive design is what we call media queries in CSS, and that's the ability to write different CSS rules, which are the way that your website looks. The ability to write different rules based on the size of someone's screen or other aspects of their device like that. So a lot of us use something called Sass or similar preprocessors for CSS to make authoring CSS a little easier, a little more powerful. So with that, we're able to embed media queries directly in what we're writing already. So we can have the styles for our website, and right in line there, we can put a media query and define styles for different size screens and different displays that people would be looking at our content with.
And I think a big trend right now is material UI design, where you're using vector graphics and those scale, from any resolution that you have. So I think that's why that's kind of the trend right now. It doesn't take a lot of bandwidth. And so SVG graphics, those are really popular right now. You can even animate those using font icons for like a little hamburger icon or something. Social icons, you can use all those, and those are all vector, so that really helps out. Yeah.
I think related to images, one of the big things that's coming through right now and entering the spec as it is for things that aren't necessarily a logo or something that could be an SVG, but something for photography or some kind of image that's JPEG or something similar. There's responsive images is starting to become a technology that we can take advantage of, and there's a couple different versions of that out there right now, and it's making its way into the actual HTML specification, which allows you to load a different image based on how big the screen is or what kind of if it's a Retina display or not. You're able to load different image assets. So, the display that you're sitting at your desk, you might want to load a really big image in that display, but on your cell phone, you actually don't need that big of an image because of the size difference there. So with some of these responsive image techniques, we're able to tailor what images we're actually loading into the site based on your device.
And there's some new technologies coming out too, like the picture tag, and then the image tag is going to have a source set that you can have. So the normal source of an image would be your just, 72 DPI graphic. And then the source set could be like the high DPI version. So browsers that support that would be able to load that in instead of the low res one. And those, you need polyfills and stuff to use right now. So I don't know if I would suggest to implement that for production code, but it's something to keep an eye on because it's going to change the way that and make it way easier for us to support high DPI graphics.
Yeah, and at Netflix, the team that I work on content platform engineering, we build more of an administration system and a CMS. So we're just now exploring how to make this responsive and what parts of it would make sense for our users, because you can't necessarily load up, a table grid with 150 rows and a whole bunch of different columns on your phone. You wouldn't necessarily want to perform that action there either, but there are parts of a dashboard that you may want to have like easy level access to. We're currently using Bootstrap for a lot of our stuff right now, looking into if that's going to be something that can go with us as we continue to go, towards responsive. I mean, it makes it really easy. It's an out-of-the-box solution. You can get a lot of those like easy win things right kind of out of the gate. But, we're kind of considering some of the other technologies out there, like Anthony has mentioned, something smaller that would maybe help us achieve those things a little quicker without dragging a framework in along with.
I think for a CMS, though, that like using a framework like Bootstrap or Foundation, one of those bigger ones that has not only a grid, to do responsive layouts, but buttons and image carousels and even nav bars and buttons. It makes perfect sense to use a framework like that for a CMS, because you can just get started right away, focus on the functionality of it rather than the design. So the design of a framework really helps keep everything consistent too.
Okay, so I heard you guys mention Bootstrap, which is a grid framework, and some of these people may not understand what that is. Mm-hmm. Is there any way you could elaborate on that some more? And another thing too, in terms of working with custom software that you're talking about, application, what about some of these guys are digital arts and design students, and some I'm pretty sure are web students too, but and some are pretty much designers who are maybe thinking about going into this web world, but don't know what Bootstrap is, don't know what other tools are out there to use. Have you guys ever experienced building any responsive design using any of the Adobe products that they're coming out with, which is what Adobe has started out with some new platforms, right? So do you guys use any of those at all? No?
No, I don't use any Adobe products myself. I did here at school a lot, and a lot of them are really good products, but for what I do, no. Twitter wrote this Bootstrap library. It includes some JavaScript stuff and some CSS stuff that essentially just augments your HTML. So if you're going to make a menu, you may build that in HTML with just a simple unordered list and a couple of series of list elements that will be links. And then Bootstrap will kind of automatically style those across the top for you, and you can add drop-downs very easily to those. And then it also provides this, like Eric mentioned, the ability to kind of get that free win. So when you scale the browser down, or if you're on a phone, it will, instead of being a menu bar that goes all the way across the screen, it'll collapse down and be kind of one of those like toggles you can press, like the kind of the affordance there to pull down and see those in a different order. So that's really what Bootstrap does. They have a whole bunch of goodies like a grid, the menu system. They have components for carousels. We're actually using 2.3.2, and I think they're on 3.0 or something like that, which is a little bit more the trendy like flat design. I think that it's flat design, and before that it was gradients or whatever. But so that's like kind of like the high level of Bootstrap. It's open source. You can go, I think, getbootstrap.com and use it. It'll really spice up a project initially just to kind of like get you started.
Yeah, and that's a good thing to note. So before I was at Big Cartel, I was at a company called HappyCog, which is a client agency. We work with different clients to build them websites. And we use Bootstrap there, as Eric was mentioning, in the prototyping phase. We would start out early on with a client and try to figure out what they were actually needing us to build. So we would work with Bootstrap because it let us build out things very quickly just to show them what something would look like. So we could take those components that Stephen was mentioning, put them together in a way to show them what it would look like if that's what we went with. And then once we decide on a direction, we start applying design to that. And the production code that we deliver at the end of a project is actually, it's fully handcrafted code from scratch. So we use Bootstrap early on in the process to get something going quickly, to make decisions quicker. And then from there, we're taking it and we're making it our own. And Bootstrap doesn't actually, for our process there, we didn't use it in the final product, but you certainly can, depending on your use case.
Yeah, and you mentioned designers too, getting into web design. I think if you use something like Bootstrap, it'll help them get jump-started into the development of it, not having to worry about too much of that, but they would have to go in and reskin all of the buttons and everything to make it have that unique look. So that would be one challenge using a framework like that.
Okay.
But I think it does give you a good sense of some of the design patterns that are out there. If you're trying to figure out an interface issue, it doesn't hurt to look through something like Bootstrap and see what design patterns are out there that are commonly used things that are pretty well understood by users on the web, right? Bootstrap is a collection of things that people generally know how to use. So you could take a look through and see if you're looking for a certain control that you need in your app or service or website, you could see if there's something there that you could take a little inspiration from and use it that way as well.
And if you're not a designer, Bootstrap even has themes that you can purchase or download for free. So like you can just focus on the development functionality of it and buy the theme and let the theme do all the design for you.
That's actually how I did my portfolio site for myself. I didn't want to do any of that, so I got Bootstrap and I spent $9 on a theme that I liked, and it was like, hooray, I'm a designer,
Which answered the question for some of these designers, right?
And you mentioned the Adobe programs that are getting into actually, for a designer, it's almost like a different way of creating a website. It's like a WYSIWYG, I guess. Dreamweaver was kind of like that, and it seems like they've kind of, offshoot from that a little bit. It's really interesting I've never used them, but I've read about a few of them. Because I think right now, a lot of the design tools like Photoshop limit the way that you do responsive design, because everything's like a pixel value. You don't work with percentages or anything in Photoshop. Sketch is one of the bigger design programs right now that support vector graphics and even make it easy for you to export a 2-time image and a 1-time image for high DPI graphics. So I think Adobe's approach to this is, from what I've read, is that you can actually scale the width of your design and see how it's going to react at different breakpoints, and it's going to generate all the code for you. And it's really interesting to me because I think that gives a lot of control to creative people. But if you need something that's a very custom solution, I think you'd be a little bit restricted in that. But it's definitely cool technology, and I think a lot of people will probably end up using it.
Okay. When we're doing responsive design, where do we start? How do we start?
Mobile first.
Okay.
Mobile first.
And plug to Luke W. I hope he's proud.
I think it's important to mention, mobile first is there's two sides of mobile first, and mobile first is a kind of thought process that says start your design on the smallest screens possible and the smallest display that you know about, and scale up from there. But it's actually two sides to mobile first, and that's mobile first design, which is what I just mentioned, which is starting out your design phase on the smallest screen and scaling up. And there's mobile first development, which you could actually do your design phase desktop down and then do your development mobile first. And the point there is that mobile first development means you start building your site for the smallest screen possible, because if you think about it, most often the small screen layout is a single column of your content, laid out in a certain way, but most of these styles that you're writing for that size are basic general styles like typography and colors and button styles and form styles and things like that are common across every size of your site. You don't often change the actual look of text inputs or headings from the smallest screen to the largest. You might change the sizes and the layout, but the look is the same. So mobile first development is writing all of that first and then scaling your browser up and applying some layout complexity on top of those basic styles that you've built out. So it's more about optimizing the amount of code that you're writing. So instead of overwriting layout styles, you're adding them on as you go.
I think another important aspect of starting there is that if you start with the smallest screen, your canvas is inherently tinier. So we talked about this in another panel on startups who do minimum viable products, and you focus on the thing that the bare minimum that will make you successful. And if your canvas is smaller, then you can't put as much on there. So you're forced to kind of think about what is absolutely necessary first, and then as the real estate grows, what can we add to it, instead of thinking like, oh, I have this amazing huge board to work with, and then when I try to put it all on the page on the mobile phone, it's like, this doesn't make sense.
So does that lead to adaptive design then?
I have no idea, actually. I would assume so.
Okay.
Kind of the same
Kind of the same
philosophy.
thing,
Is, adaptive is how the layout might change on the particular breakpoint. Responsive is kind of like everything all together, making sure it works on all devices and screens.
So let me ask you something. And this is something that has been a debate in the development world, I think, with the mobile first versus the desktop first. I'm pretty sure you guys have, knockheads on that type of thing too. Yeah, which is why I heard you mention about the development side of mobile first versus the design side. Do you find that most people are going to that mobile first concept, or do you find that it's a split down the middle because you have to stop and think about the intent of the product? The intent of the product is what's important, right?
Right, yeah.
So how does that affect the development side? I mean, you talk about 1 column versus 2 columns, 3 columns, all of that stuff. But how does it affect the development side when you go 1 column? What do you leave? What do you put in? When you're designing mobile first, how does it affect the intent?
I think one part of that is that with responsive being kind of the way of the world these days, design and development both are a lot more about the modularity of a system, and instead of focusing on the design as a whole, break it down into modules and really make decisions about how one particular module works across all these different screen sizes. And as an example, maybe Stephen was saying earlier, your navigation. Instead of trying to figure out that navigation issue when you're looking at everything else on your site as a whole, think about navigation alone and figure out, how does this navigation make most sense at small sizes? And then think about navigation only all the way up through the desktop sizes, and think about it into small modules and put those pieces together to make your whole site. Because if you would get pretty overwhelmed if you tried to do everything all at the same time, either design or development. So I think modularity is something that is helping us out, on that front to simplify our process a little, is just making sure we get each piece right in its own right, so that when it fits into the larger puzzle, things still feel and look right.
Yeah, and if you develop, modular components, you can probably reuse those on other websites that you do too to speed things up. You wouldn't want it to look exactly the same on every website, but having that code that you can work off of will save you a lot of time.
Another kind of funky thing, I mentioned there's kind of 2 mobile firsts. There's development, which mobile first development is from the people that I'm talking with, is pretty common these days, just because it does simplify the way you write code. But a lot of the designers that I've worked with, specifically in client agencies, when you're working with clients, they often want to see what their site's going to look like at the largest size and things. So a lot of designers, we try to educate clients about why mobile first is the philosophy that we worked with. But the design a lot of times will be desktop down. And then it's our job as the developers to make that functional and written in an elegant way. So we would normally take that mobile first approach on the development side, even though the design was desktop down in mindset.
Yeah, I think the mobile first is a very good goal to shoot for, but I found too, like you were just talking about, the client almost always wants to see the desktop, like what is their money getting, like all the bells and whistles. So the designers typically have to start with desktop. So the mobile first is kind of hard to do in real life, I would say, but you always want to think about mobile first. Steven said, the MVP, the minimal viable product, for that small canvas, that small screen that you're working with. I like to think of it also as like most valuable product too, because you have to trim away kind of like all the fat from your website and represent exactly what the website goal is, on the mobile device, and then you start adding to that experience as you increase the size of it.
So does that affect the different sizes that are out there? of the phones, the tablets?
Yeah, like
Because that's the big one too, right?
there's basically no range now when it comes to responsive. All the watches that are coming out. I know watches, you're not really supposed to sit there and browse a website, but you probably
People
can. Yeah, some
Always do.
websites even work already. My friend has a Google Android watch, and he pulled up a website and he said, "Wow, I can actually like read everything," and like it went down to one column just fine. So, you know, you can go everywhere from like a 2-inch watch device to, you know, an iMac Retina screen, which is huge, or even a large television. So there's no range to it anymore, I'd say.
Okay. So in terms of the because I'm always on this fence of the mobile first and the, you know, because I'm on the advertising side. So I look at it and I go, okay, like you said, the clients love to see that, and that's what we push most of the time when we design. But as you said, that now we have the watch, and if we're doing mobile first, how does that affect the concept that you're thinking about of mobile first?
Yeah, I think it won't overtake the mobile experience. It might be an extension of it. I think Domino's Pizza has one of the first apps that you can get for the watch, and so you can be sitting on your couch, and instead of pulling out your phone or something, you can just order pizza right from your wrist.
You could probably just yell at your wrist, pizza, and it would just
The pizza.
Siri, can you get me a pizza?
And they have like the process that you can see, like, oh, your pizza's in the oven now, so you can see that right there and keep an eye on it. Yeah.
I think the interesting thing, though, is that the mobile first, you know, it would cater to small displays like that. But think about the other way we were doing it before, which was, you know, the largest size down. Where do you start your largest size at? Because if it was 10 years ago, you would start at 1024 by 768, and if it was 8 years ago, you would start at 1200 by 800, and if it was 3 years ago, you would start at 1400. And then, you know, where are we at 5 years from now? If we're like, displays can always get bigger, but they can't really get smaller. You know, it's at a certain point you're not really going to be able to use a device that's too small. So, you know, maybe the watch is the minimum size of a display that would be useful to poke around a website at, but there's really no upper limit to a display size. So by setting yourself up, you know, mobile first, you're able to expand as wide as you may ever need. But if you start from a desktop down site, if another device came out that you really, you know, gained popularity and you wanted to be compatible with that, you would have to go recode your entire site at the next size up, which is kind of possible.
I run into that a lot too. It's, you know, the designs are all, just like I said before, pixel-based value. So the comps that you get might be a mobile comp, 640 wide, you know, to support Retina, high DPI graphics, and then up to like maybe a 1400 pixel wide comp. But, you know, we can go way beyond that. Just, you know, the standard Thunderbolt display is over 2000 pixels wide. So it's like, what do you do at that point? Like, are you going to stretch all the background images or make the content just span across that whole area? And I think for some designs that works, but for others it just feels like a lot of wide open stretched spaces. So,
and that's like somewhat related to, you know, he's talking about specific comps at set sizes. That was the traditional way that design would work. But in the past few years, there's been a growing trend of designing in the browser. And actually, my friend Dan Mull he always has a good quote that I like using here, where he says, it's not so much designing in the browser, it's deciding in the browser. And the point there is that, you know, you could have your designer focus on the visual side of your website and getting that brand and that tone and that feeling right for your client. You know, we're talking about clients here specifically, but it applies to products as well. Have your designer focus on the visual feel of it. After you've prototyped and made sure that you're building the right thing, they can get the actual look right. And then work with them to build that out in a browser, because there's going to be instances that they weren't forced to think through because they were working at a fixed size. But by working together with the designer developer, even if you're one person or two, you actually get to the point where you're going to have to make design decisions in the browser. And if you're working that closely with them, your process is going to be much better, much tighter, and you're not going to have those tricky spots that we've all been in, which is like, I have this comp and that comp, but I have to figure out what happens in the middle. And nobody's here for me to ask their preference on or anything like that. So move those decisions up earlier in your process by getting into the browser a little sooner and building things out and seeing how it lays out, and talk with people and give them something. You know, build something and load it up on your phone and hand it to them and say, what do you think about that particular section? Because you're not really going to ever get to that point of a decision unless it's in your hand or on your display or something that you can play with.
Yeah, in the inspector in Chrome and Firefox and Safari and Internet Explorer is very great for being able to tweak the position or the color, border radius, right on the fly. So a lot of the times the designer will come over and you're trying to get the pixel perfect representation from the comp to the screen or the web browser. So you're tweaking values slightly, and they love that. I love that. I've even started teaching some of the designers like how to go into the inspector, like right click and inspect element, and just go in here and just push up or down, and you can adjust the units in there, and they like it. They feel like they're a developer too, so it helps out because in Photoshop you might be working with like kerning or something that translates a little bit different in the browser. Might be letter spacing or line height instead. So they're learning about the ways that we communicate back and forth and make it consistent. And they can go in there and be like, oh, I wanted my letter spacing to be like 0.04 EM. And so that really helps the communication back and forth so we can represent their design correctly.
It's one of those things where, this is like one of the things I get on a soapbox about all the time, but where do we draw these lines between who's a designer and who's a front-end developer, who's a back-end developer, and all this kind of stuff. And I think we're generally awful at drawing lines between things, because where does design end, right? If we're saying design ends in Photoshop, what about all the design decisions that are made when you start coding something out? Designer actually drifts into the front-end development. Where does front-end development stop? If you're writing template code, but it's in a CMS, are you doing back-end development or front-end development? You're doing, it doesn't matter, actually. The point is it doesn't matter. Everyone is working together on a team, and your responsibilities as a front-end developer, back-end developer, whatever you classify yourself as, is going to drift into every area, right? So don't think about it so much as these set roles, the hard lines. Bring someone who considers themselves a designer, bring them into the code. Get them in there and looking at it and see what it's like, because you're going to work so much better if everyone's skills overlaps. And you can work together better that way, rather than, if you were designing a website and handed it to me and I wrote how I would code it and hand it to him, you make it into a CMS, and then Steven's putting the content in the CMS. It's like, why are we doing that assembly line thing if we can all do it at the same time and overlap and collaborate in a much better way?
And you kind of bring up a good point with the drawing hard lines around things. Like the reason why we say mobile first right now, that we actually have a reason for that. It's not that mobile first is just a hard line. Right now we say mobile first because people are using their phones, and we have metrics to prove that. We have metrics all over the world that are showing people are using their phones more and more and more, and tablets are picking up too. So watches may have an impact on how we do design, but they may not. We don't actually know. There's a lot of things that we're unsure of in what we're designing. So it's important to just kind of remember that not everything is like this solid line in the sand. You have to do mobile first. It may not actually fit what you're building or the use case that you're designing for. So, but if it is something that is going to be on those screens and it's something that you want to start there, it never hurts to start with an MVP, even if you're on a 10-foot UI or, which is like a TV experience, you're kind of sitting at home watching Netflix or whatnot, or if you're on a desktop, it never hurts to trim the fat out. But just because people say mobile first right now doesn't mean that you have to start there.
I also think that I was breaking a lot of my cardinal rules up here because I keep saying the words desktop and mobile, which I try to never say. I try to say small and large screen, because what is mobile? Was the iPhone mobile when it was a 3-inch screen? But what about now that's a 6 Plus is out there and it's a 5.5-inch screen, right? He's got an iPad. That's pretty mobile. And what if you're riding a train on a laptop? Are you mobile? Because you're not at your house. You're on a train, and you're on probably a crappy Wi-Fi connection. So the term mobile is even part of the crappy lines that we draw, I think. And that's part of there's the screen that you're looking at it, but there's also the context that you're using it in, which is hard to get at, but it's important to make decisions based on context, not only display size.
And I think you were talking about how do you sell it to the client? How do you back up mobile first? And I think Steven brings up a really good point. All these statistics and things that we have proving that people are using their phones to browse the web, using their tablets, making tons of purchases from their phones, and it's like this exponential growth that's going to be overtaking desktop probably fairly soon. I would ask how many people are on their desktop during the day, how many hours versus on your phone. You probably always have your phone, and odds are even if you're with your friends, you're looking at your phone. you're spending most of your time looking at your phone versus your desktop these days. So it just goes to prove that like if clients want to reach customers, they have to do it through mobile.
Now, back to clients again with mobile, with large screen and small screen.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Got it.
We have some clients that when you sit them out there, you have to, they would want a website but never know anything about the responsive design. Do we tell them, or do we still design in the mindset that we're in this box for a large screen? Do we tell them? Or on the other side too, you have some clients with a website that is not responsive. How do you get them to be responsive? Do you build on top of that, or do you start from scratch with them? What do you do?
In my time at HappyCog, we've had a few clients that whether we've built their site previously in other years and they've come back to us and said, we want to take the existing site we have and responsify it or something like that. But oftentimes we were redoing it from the ground up.
Yeah.
And part of that is they might not know what responsive design means when they come to you. They might come to you and say, we need a website, like you were saying, and not necessarily know about responsive design, but that's okay because they're coming to us because we are the experts at this, right? And part of our job, they're not just paying us to make a website. They're paying us to educate them about what a website is and why it is important and how it should be built. And a lot of the client agency interaction is about educating your client and teaching them about what it is that we're doing. You don't want to just say, give us a bunch of money and we'll give you a website at the end of this 6-month period. We want to take them in and work with them and educate them and say, this is the world that we're living in today. We're living in a world where you have a device of every size. And that's the way that we're going to design your site. So here's what we need from you. We need all of your domain knowledge about what you do and how you do it. We need the content that you work with. We need this parts that you're an expert in. You're going to handle that. We're going to handle the part that we're experts in. And in the middle, we're going to create a great website.
Yeah, and a lot of clients think that they know what they want, but they actually don't. And it's important to keep that in mind. So they may come to you and say, oh, I heard that I need like SEO and SEM and responsive and WordPress and whatever. But that's not really the questions that they're asking or the things that they need. What they need is their business to be successful. They need their product to be reachable to their demographic. And that's like Anthony said, that's our job to figure that out. It may not be that they want responsive. It may just be that, hey, it turns out, 40% of the people who are going to look at this are going to do it from their phone and purchase it there. It may not be the case. They may actually be kind of more of a large screen only thing. But so they may come into you and say, oh, I want responsive, but they don't actually need it. What they actually are trying to say is, I want people to be able to use this on these platforms because I want to sell product or I want to sell services. And that's something to keep in mind there is that your clients and the people you work with won't really know what it is that they're wanting. You kind of need to go behind what they're saying and what they're asking for and find out the root reason of what they're looking to do with their business to be successful online.
Yeah, responsive is almost like a household name in a way where the client might have heard of it and know that they need it, but it's almost like they ask if it's going to be responsive just to open up the dialogue, the conversation, to know what they're getting for their money. You want all the bells and whistles that you get on a car that you purchase. You might not know what everything does, but just like it's the car manufacturer to educate you on what all these features do and why it makes it better and why it's more expensive, I guess. And what we also do too is when a client comes to us, at first we might audit their website. So we might get them to allow us to view their Google Analytics, which hopefully they have on there. And you can go in there and you can see which devices people are using to view their website. So you already have statistics to back up your reasoning. You'd show that 30% of your visitors are from an iPad and an iPhone. And then you can show them on an iPad and iPhone what their website looks like that and how the user experience is. And they might be shocked to see that it doesn't really work as they would hope.
So do we get rid of, not get rid of, do we still have people building mobile websites? You remember those?
Yeah, I think it depends on the product. If you go to Apple.com or Facebook, we're all on Facebook. People are probably on Facebook right now. And and you're on your laptop and you go responsive with it and it's not going to work. You're like, these are like two of the biggest websites right now, and they don't support responsive. And I think they're doing it for a reason. You know, Apple's trying to push their App Store app on the phone. If you're going to be on your phone, they want you to use apps. That's always been Apple's philosophy. Apps. So Facebook also wants you to use the app if you're on the a tablet or mobile device, because that's a huge part of their business and the way that they generate money through ads and stuff. So they have purpose behind that. So a dot mobile extension I think has gone away, or M dot, thankfully, but that's not to say that a huge e-commerce website is going to fully support mobile. They might want to push an app more.
Another reason that we see those out there a lot is that there's a lot of misinformation out there about the performance of responsive design and how performant a responsive website is or can be or anything like that. And a lot of people are saying that responsive isn't a performance. It's not performant enough for us. So let's make a M.dot site, but it's really not. That's not true at all. There's a lot of well-built responsive websites that are more performant than any M.dot site just because they're built well. You can build any website and make it horrible at performance, performance aspect. And you can take any website that's horrible right now and make it better. It's not, things aren't bad with performance because of the way that you've coded it. It's because of the decisions that you've made behind it. So you can code something with media queries that's still just as performant as something else that you've built focusing only on performance. It's just a matter of the decisions that you make in the process of building that thing and whether you're making the right decisions and implementing things in the way that's responsible. That goes down to the way that you serve assets to devices. That goes down to the way that you're handling assets once they're on the device, and everything like that. If you're building a website, progressive enhancement with a progressive enhancement workflow, you're going to build something that's more performant and get those benefits that you're looking for. But it's not, performance is not exclusive from responsive design, which is a big issue with why we see M.dot sites and things like that.
Okay.
A lot of the time, too, developing for a mobile device is a lot better than a desktop user experience, because you're really going down to Chrome and maybe Safari with a few sprinkles of Firefox and IE. But really, you get to use all of the new features that are coming out with HTML5 and CSS3. So you can, and there's no hovers. You don't have to do button hovers anymore. So, but you have all these things at your disposal now that you can use: accelerometers, compass. Touch is great, and it's just really good to be able to have the latest technology at your disposal.
And Anthony is right there in the performance issue for I think 99% of all of the stuff out there. You're really not going to see that much drag on a performance thing. But it is important to keep in mind, I think, that when you have a context change from large screen to small screen or whatnot, it can become important eventually. We're tuning things constantly at Netflix all the time. It's always very crucial that we're always delivering exactly what you need and nothing more to achieve that, and keep all of that over-the-wire stuff down very far. So a lot of the stuff that we're doing there can be affected by that. So there's still some use for that M.dot concept in terms of it's a different context, and we don't need that extra stuff. And it is actually at 0.001% performance issue that we really want to solve. So it's not totally going away, but for by and large, for the most part, the responsive stuff will perform just as well. And there's kind of like that whole issue that we have with hardware, in that we're always making things like that works on the hardware we have right now, and invariably the hardware is upgrading. So we're starting to see the performance go down, just because hardware is increasing, and that may plateau eventually as we approach the limit of physics on what we can do with processors. And
well, the issue is that the hardware that we have is always upgrading, but there's an entire continent of Africa that's getting mobile connection, and I think this is the year that mobile connections will surpass electricity in Africa. But their devices, they're not using iPhone 6s over there, because that's not what the carriers there, have. They're using devices that are much older than us. So I brought up progressive enhancement before, which is building for the lowest possible device that you can support and enhancing when it's necessary. So there's that whole side too, that there's a billion people about to come online and start looking at your content that are using phones that you've forgotten about completely. So I think it's important to always remember who your users are. And if you have users out there, you need to be giving them content that they can use and they can interact with. Now that might not always be the case. You know, you might be building a news site for the Orlando area and then your users are all here. So you know what assumptions you can make based on the hardware that's here. But if you're building something like, you know, something that's global, you know, Facebook, Wikipedia, these things that are everywhere, you're going to have to support a lot more people that don't have the hardware you have and that don't have the connection speeds you have. You know what I mean? There's not as much infrastructure out in some of these areas. Even rural parts of America have, you know, they're still on dial-up speeds. So don't forget to look at who's using the stuff that you're building and cater to them.
Okay. Well, good stuff, man. So what about someone who's going to go into what are some of the things that you can give to these students here that may help them to understand how do I get there? You know, if I've never done it before, or even if the person has never designed or would love to do website, what's the best thing for them to start this responsive approach to designing for the web?
My top suggestion would be to go check out Ethan Marcotte, who's the guy that came up with responsive design and wrote the first article on it back in 2010 on the list apart. He wrote a book published by A Book Apart. It's called Responsive Design. And you should check that out for sure because it's, you know, it's straight from the horse's mouth of the guy that kind of figured this out to begin with and has been promoting it since. But his book is super short. It's not, you know, it's not overly wordy or anything like that. And it goes through exactly where responsive design came from, how to implement it. I think a new version just came out not too long ago. And I think it's only, you know, you can get the ebook version for I think $12 or something like that. So I would definitely pick up a $9. $9. It's awesome. You know, price of 1 month of Netflix. Just kidding. You should get Netflix too.
I just saw some of my DAD students writing it down and they got the book already. So
there you go. Read that book then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Any other?
You know, and it's as a hiring manager in the past, there's a huge amount of value in a designer who will take it upon themselves to learn things like responsive design, HTML, CSS. You don't have to be a wizard, you don't have to be a guru, but that ability to come into our world and help us, you know, like, because really our job as engineers and developers is to kind of help you bring these designs to life. And a lot of times if you just stop at Photoshop, you know, like Anthony mentioned earlier, and the communication stops there and you just hand it off, there's going to be some decisions that we have to make, and it would be really great if we could bring you into that, because it's a collaborative industry, and we want to work with you. We want to like put this out there, like bring it to life and help it grow into something really amazing. So if you're able to, if you're like, oh, you know, I was only taught like Photoshop and Illustrator at Full Sail, and that's kind of a bummer. I got like one class on CSS. Like anything that you can do, you know, like by reading these books and becoming familiar with these topics, maybe push yourself a little bit further outside of where you may be like, oh, I thought that was just for like web engineers, but try to step out there and just like get in there and play around. That's the beauty of the internet. You know, if you think back to when like IE 5.5 was coming out and dynamic HTML was a thing, like everybody was in love with the internet because they could all just open up a text editor and play around with it and break stuff and make things and just enjoy what it was. And if you can push yourself to do that, there's a huge amount of value, especially in hireability.
Yeah, I think there's so many things out there that you can learn from. So if you're not getting it, you know, from Full Sail, or you want to expand on what you're learning here, or go out of your degree curriculum altogether, there's, you know, online resources like Smashing Magazine or any of the blogs out there that are covering new technologies and tutorials and how to do all these things like responsive web design. They also offer online workshops and talks. You can go to conferences. There's just so much out there that, you know, you can really learn whatever you want. You could go to YouTube and, you know, learn how to play the guitar. There's everything out there for you right now.
Okay. And I guess the Full Sail students have lynda.com too, right?
That's right. Yeah. A lot of good resources on there.
Right. Okay. At this time, we have a few minutes for question and answers from the audience. And for those people who are online, we do have an online moderator who can assist you with question. And if you have a question for the panelists here, please raise your hand so that we can, you know, accommodate that. All right. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. My question is, I'm actually that person that you described as being like Illustrator, Photoshop, stop. And I'm trying to figure out, like, I know you guys mentioned a few resources, but topic-wise, where would you suggest someone kind of starting if their interest is more on the design creative side as opposed to technical engineering side?
I think Sketch would be a great app for you to learn. Most agencies now are using it just because it allows you to test your design that you're doing on your phone. You can mirror what you're seeing on your desktop right on your phone. Like, they have an app for that.
It's trademarked.
It's trademarked
It's
even?
trademarked.
Oh,
You
wow.
can't say that.
You can't say they have an app for that.
There is an app for that.
There may be an app for that.
So yeah, Sketch would be a really good one for you to look into.
Sketch.
Sketch 2.
SketchUp's awesome, though. It's
3.
3D, though. That's crazy stuff.
I haven't used it, so.
Sketchapp.com.
Sketch is
I
great,
think.
yes. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I would say that HTML and CSS are, you don't have to get into the crazy side of those things to learn a little bit about it. And you know, if for nothing else, you'll be able to listen in on conversations and pick up some tips from there. But I would do some, intro to HTML and CSS kind of stuff, just so that you get a little bit of a sense for the underlying technology there that's actually driving those websites and all that kind of stuff, if you haven't already.
Yeah, and there's also people, alumni from your program that you can possibly reach out to. I know, like myself, for the web program, I never mind if someone reaches out. I'm sure Anthony would probably say this, like people love answering questions and helping people learn. So, and don't be intimidated just because you may think like, oh, I don't know those things, or that's over my head or whatnot. It's important to remember. Like every day, probably 2-3 times a day, I'm reminded I would not have a job if Stack Overflow was like offline. Like I have to look things up on there all the time, or at least be able to ask somebody at work if this problem's been solved, can you walk me through it? So it's okay to kind of feel like overwhelmed, and there's a lot out there. Just always be asking questions, and ask people who, find somebody who may be a designer and they also do some HTML, CSS, and just say, hey, would you be willing to show me how to get started, or maybe give me some pointers as well? And more often than not, you'll find that they will. That's
really good, because I think if we even think about the way the internet started, the internet became a thing because scientists all over the world wanted to share what they were working on, so they can kind of collaborate and they don't overlap what they're doing. And I think that spirit has never went away on the web. I think it's, you're going to find some jerks out there, and there's going to be people that you don't really want to associate with. But on the large, the large part of things is everyone wants to help, and they really want to, help answer questions and mentor you. And I think that's like probably the best advice you can get, is just go out and ask people, and use the little contact forms on people's site, tweet at them, get in touch, because people want to talk.
Thank you.
Question? We have one up here.
Hi, actually, I'm back here. I've got some questions from the live feed from YouTube. This one is from Dave. He said that you guys had mentioned about collaboration, but what advice would you give to graphic designers specifically that would make your jobs easier in the future?
Graphic designers specifically, I love when I'm able to sit down with like an experienced designer and have them be able to walk me through how it's going to actually live in the browser, because the context changes from Photoshop to browser, even if the screen size is the same. So like Eric mentioned, being able to come into the Chrome Inspector tool and understand, like, hey, when I say kerning, I actually mean like letter spacing or whatnot, and work with us in that sense is always great. I'm fortunate enough that like our XD director will sometimes send me pull requests. Hey, I noticed you're using this spinner, and that's the wrong spinner. The one that I want for our platform here is going to look like this, and here's the CSS for it. So being at least somewhat familiar of understanding, like, hey, here's some code, or here I found this out, or I kind of like mocked this up. Can you take and enhance this or make it production ready or whatnot? Like those are fabulous skills to have and work with.
There's a bunch of prototyping tools out there too that designers can use to like animate user interfaces, which I would love to do, because I started off, at Full Sail, I'm a computer animation grad, so that's kind of like animation is like my passion. So I always try to incorporate that in all the front end work that I do. But as designers, you have something in mind some type of user experience that you want to get across, and you are like crossing your fingers that the developer is going to be able to pull it off. So if you can use one of these prototyping apps, I think one's called like atomic.io that's in beta, that looks really nice right now. if you can go in there and animate some things and show the developer how you want it, I think you'll get what you're going for a lot easier.
And also Anthony actually mentioned in one of his earlier sessions the saying that like everything changes when fingers touch glass, and it's really important for you guys to remember when you're collaborating with us. What you will show a user in a wireframe, they will say that looks nice. Then you'll show them a comp, and they'll say that looks nice, and then we'll go build it. Even if we build it exactly to spec, pixel perfect, all of a sudden it's not about it looks nice. They're using it now, and we have to do these usability things. So keeping that in mind and bringing us in early when you're building these things out, remembering that like as we work with you and bring this to life, like we're going to have to kind of adapt things, and we can answer some of those questions for you before the users even get a chance to see it and play around with it. Like, hey, I was thinking that it would work this way, or I was thinking that you could do this. Bring us in early, even if you're not in our tools, we're almost always more than happy to come over to your world and say like, okay, let's talk about how this is going to eventually translate over here.
All right. And there's another question from Joe Murray. Has growth of technology with iPads, mobiles, etc. made designing more difficult, or just opened a door to new generations and more creative opportunities for upcoming websites?
Both, I think. It's always more difficult when there's more work to do because there's more things to think about, and there's more places for a design or an application to break down or have areas that they struggle in. But it absolutely opens a door. Also earlier, apparently I learned a lot at your talk.
Apparently
so. The iPhone came out and it kind of revolutionized the way that we look at phones and the mobile industry in general. And look at all the jobs that we have right now where, people are you're just like recruiters emailing them all the time. Oh, you have iOS on your LinkedIn. You have iOS on your LinkedIn. I want to hire you. Like we open kind of like, we're like a self-creating industry in that sense. So anytime we come out with some new technology, there's more jobs that are going to come with that and more things to do. And that's a good thing. Even though it's a little more difficult, that doesn't mean that it's bad.
Grab one here. Hi, I'm Patrick Tingalergo. I'm a web design and development student here. I want to thank you guys for speaking to us. And a question I have was when you guys mentioned apps as well as responsive design. Is there a difference? This is kind of like a development type of question. Is there a difference when you're developing for an app rather than just kind of doing a responsive design?
Yeah, there's a lot of differences, but we're still designing things and we're still designing interfaces that go on the same screen. So technically, the technical side of things, the languages are different, and the things that you use to build the products is different. But responsive design is making its way into native app development these days. Last summer, Apple released some development tools for us that allow us to change the way that our apps look on different size screens, specifically because they knew they were going to launch the iPhone 6 Plus last fall. So they gave us the tools to be able to, it's not quite breakpoints like we see on the web, but responsive design is in native apps and native app development now. So, the concepts are all the same. The actual tools that you use are different, but the concepts, the design, the thinking behind it, it's all the same. And a screen's a screen. It's just a matter of how it gets there.
Yeah, I think like Netflix is a good example of that too, where like you're watching it on your TV or you're using your Wii or Xbox or whatever to view it. You're laying in bed using your tablet. You're on the subway on your phone watching Netflix. So, it's probably all the same app. I don't know, but if you can develop in a way with responsive in mind, it could very well be the same app for all of those.
So we actually don't have the same app for all of our applications because the hardware changes so drastically between those experiences. We kind of break things off. Now there are some shared resources that we split across the UIs. But pending any given environment, that context of the hardware is really crucial, and the experience for us, fortunately, is really easy. Like, what are you doing? You're finding movies and watching movies. Like, so that kind of is the baseline. We don't have to worry too much about anything else changing, but then we just need to optimize that UI to work with what you're doing there.
Mm-hmm. And Microsoft is even doing something where Windows 10 is going to be the OS that's on all platforms. So everything from your computer, your Xbox, your Surface, and your Lumia phone, it's all going to be running the same code. You can develop an app, with one language, and it's going to work on all devices. So I think that's coming. That's the wave of the future, I think, for app development.
Hi, my name's Allie. I'm also a DAD student, but I have a passion for web. Like I know HTML, CSS, Java, PHP, and I was just wondering, like, what other programs do you guys use besides Bootstrap and like Sass?
One of the ones that as far as CSS preprocessors, and I can get like very adamant about this and like in big fights, Stylus is my favorite, hands down the best one. Stylus is a really good preprocessor. I know there's less out there as well. When we looked at the company I was at before, kind of tearing out Bootstrap, we were running into just some difficulties of upgrading certain things and finding other parts breaking because it was a framework. We ended up using Jeet and Rupture, and it was like a combination of tools that kind of helped with that, push that like atomic CSS design where you're getting a little more componentized in what you're doing. So I would check those out.
I would say if you are using Sass, I might recommend using SCSS, where you're keeping the parentheses or curly brackets and semicolons. It basically is CSS. You're just given all of the functionality of Sass, being able to use mix-ins and variables and doing all of that. A big trend right now, or maybe not a trend, but like a technology use on the web is like WebGL. There's 3.js for doing 3D stuff. Canvas is another thing. There's so many frameworks out now. It's hard to keep track of what's gonna stay along for the long run. Like Angular, Backbone. There's just so many that it's hard to keep up. But trying to focus on like a couple, I would say, and figure out what you like, and then just become the best at it that you can. Because I know, if you're great at one thing, an agency might look for you to do that one thing really well, then be a jack of all trades, because they're looking for the best of the best, and they probably are hiring for all these different things. So just focus in, hone in on a few things. Don't overwhelm yourself.
And I would say, branching off the Sass things that they were just talking about, Bourbon and Neath are two Sass libraries that are particularly my favorite. Bourbon is a lot of different mix-ins and styles and things to use that makes writing Sass a little easier, and Neath is a way to build layouts easier with Sass and using some of the more powerful features of Sass to make interesting layouts and do it in a little bit easier and more manageable way.
Yeah, and Yeoman is a really nice way to kind of get a structure of a website set up automatically for you. You basically just like name the project and hit a button, and like it creates all your directories for you, and like gives you a index.html and like the starting JavaScript file and CSS, and so that's for like scaffolding. And then there's Gulp and Grunt. You probably heard of those, and those are task runners. So instead of having to by hand go through and minify and combine all of your CSS and JavaScript files, even optimize your images, it can do that all for you. So definitely look into those, because every place is utilizing that now. It saves a lot of time.
One more.
Hi, I'm Amanda. I'm a recent music business graduate, and this might break away a little bit from the development aspect, but in terms of functionality and marketability, how crucial do you think it is for the mobile site to match the desktop site, or do you think that it provides an incentive for the mobile site to provide an extra experience for the user than the desktop?
I think as long as you're staying within the brand guidelines, you'll be fine. Like, don't change up the color scheme all that much, if it goes away from your brand. So it's all about giving the user experience that you want to that viewer on that device. So I would say typically the more consistent, the better, but I'm sure there's outliers for that. So.
In terms of functionality and what the site actually is, I think it's important to realize that there's a increasingly large number of Americans and people worldwide that their only access is through their either phone or tablet or something that is not a computer, not in the traditional sense, a large display thing that sits on a desk or a laptop. So it's important that every user out there is able to do the important things on your site, whether that's, whether you have a site where you go to buy tickets to events, make sure that everyone can buy a ticket to your event, and that's not something that's reserved for a specific display class or anything like that. Just make sure that the thing that's important to the business that you're working with or the product that you're working with, that no matter what device you have, the user's able to accomplish that task.
Are you also asking about the marketing aspect of it in terms of SEO also? Yes? Okay. I thought that was that too. Okay.
So yeah, if it's, the way that responsive design is handled, it's the same CSS that's running and HTML that's running on your laptop and desktop browsers and things like that on your phones and tablets as well. So it's the same underlying code. So any benefits that anything that you're working with to make your site more search engine friendly or anything like that on any size is going to apply to all sizes. And that's really the strong point of responsive design, that it's all the same code so that you're getting those benefits across the board.
Yeah, just today I got an email from Google that said one of my really old sites that I don't even keep update anymore told me please update this website to make it more mobile friendly because by April 21st they're going to be implementing something in their SEO, the search results, that ranks your website if you're doing a search from a mobile phone based on how well your site is coded for mobile. They're also going to be doing something where they put underneath your description if there's going to be a feature that you're utilizing on your website that isn't supported on the device that you're currently on. So if you have a really old site that uses Flash and you're on a device that doesn't support Flash, it's going to say this site requires Flash. You might have some issues viewing it. So Google is putting their foot down basically and saying, responsive is here. You need to do it. It's basically a requirement now for any successful online business, I would say.
All right. I have a question from Weston from the stream. He says, I have used Netflix on a lot of platforms such as Xbox, MacBook, and Apple TV. It seems like all of the user experiences are different. Is there a reason for the lack of consistency?
So at Netflix we do a lot of A/B testing, and also, like I mentioned earlier, the specific hardware for any of those devices may impose limitations to the UI that we generate there and what we're able to do. So if you're designing for a 10-foot experience on, say, a Samsung TV, they may provide us an SDK that allows us to have certain UI elements that are not able to be viewed on a Vizio or something like that. Which is kind of a bad example because I don't actually work on those teams and I'm not sure the specifics there. But it's the same, when you go from an iOS app to an Android app, if you don't build everything 100% custom and you're just taking advantage of what's provided to you, they're inherently going to look a little bit different.
That sort of goes back to what I was saying earlier, that you need to make sure that you're understanding the context that your users are in and they're using your products in, because the context do switch when they're switching devices and switching, if you're at home in front of your TV, that's different than on the go with your phone. And that's a context switch, right? It's also a device switch, but it's a context switch. And I think that goes into what, obviously I'm not at Netflix, so I don't know the decisions that are being made there, but it seems like that's what is driving a lot of the decisions is, this display is actually way bigger than your phone, but it's way farther away too. So we have to change the way that's used because you're sitting all the way across the room clicking a little remote rather than having something right up here, touching and interacting with it directly.
I saw something yesterday. This is a little off topic, but a guy created a little bookmarklet that you can put in your bookmark favorites bar. When you're on Netflix on the desktop experience, the home screen has a lot of horizontal sliders on there to go through new releases or something. He made the bookmarklet so you click that and then it modifies the markup on the page and expands it all out so you don't have to scroll horizontally through it. You can just see it in a big tiled list.
Nice.
So people are coming up with modifications for the UI even too, which is kind of cool.
Wouldn't you call that adaptive then?
Hacking.
Good, yeah.
It's almost like hacking though.
No, and there is a lot of stuff on our tech blog on what we do with A/B testing, and it's actually really cool to see them do that. But we do run different tests across different cells where we want to see what the best UI is, and they encourage us to come up with these ideas where we want to say, oh, hey, I think that this UI may actually get users connected with the movies that they want more, or maybe just able to watch them quicker. And so instead of like, productizing that and sending that out to, however many million subscribers we have, we'll run it on just a small allocation and say, okay, like, maybe this set of users we're just gonna see. So you may be seeing some of that from device to device, depending on what your account looks like in terms of like how we're doing the tests that week.
I had a question about, in reference to the responsive and native. In reference, like you had mentioned that at Netflix you also use other resources than like a native application. You do some of that as well. Do you run into any issues with like Adobe Cordova or PhoneGap where like performance issues with videos, or what are the issues with trying to do something, taking a website and doing something like that to where you build it for a native application using a third-party source versus rewriting it in iOS or Objective-C or Java, something like that? What are the advantages and disadvantages to that?
So right now, a lot of our UIs are not fully native because we'll run into issues, like the Apple App Store, for example, where they have this like kind of gatekeeper imposed. So anytime that we would want to send out an update, we have to wait for them to approve it, and then the application gets updated. So in a lot of cases, it's easiest for us to like make a native wrapper that will eventually pull in the UI, and we'll be able to push out updates or maybe run different tests based on like, oh, hey, when you log in, we're going to give you this UI or that UI. So a lot of what we're doing is coming in from over the wire so that we have a little bit more control over that experience for you. And we'll use whatever we can to get that started as far as the iOS stuff or the native stuff goes. But I think for the most part, for what we're doing, since a large part of the application is content that's coming over the wire anyways, it's not something that you need it all there on your phone. It's something that you're going to be streaming video in. I think it just makes a little bit more sense to go that route.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm a DAD student. Prior to coming here, I was building websites, so I know HTML5, CSS3, jQuery. So my question is, with these new advances in vectors and animating them, being able to change a menu icon into the exit menu icon, and it's giving more opportunities to graphic designers to have a larger part by being able to build the vectored images. What would you say are the first steps, to be able to move towards, learning and creating these vectored images for web design?
I know that there's I don't know if anyone's heard of the website CSS Tricks. They have so that's a great site for, with a lot of resources on front-end development specifically. Chris Coyer posted some really great SVG. That's kind of been his big thing lately, is he's actually writing a book about SVGs and all this kind of stuff. But he had a great post about using SVGs and vector images on the web today. So I would, just go home, Google CSS Tricks SVG, give that a read through. He's got a couple different posts on there. You'll find like 5 or 6 different things, but he's linked to all sorts of resources about, here's SVG animation, here's how to load in SVG in a performant way, and here's how some people have used it for icon systems and things like that. That's the resource I always point to.
Hi, my name is Rashawn, and I'm a mobile development student. And with recent developments in cars and automobiles, specifically, let's say, the new autopilot feature in Tesla cars, this allows more usability with interface, specifically with the console. So Tesla has a very, very large touchscreen. So where does development stand in developing for new car consoles, like, let's say, CarPlay with Apple?
Yeah, so CarPlay is Apple's kind of foray into that in-car entertainment type thing. CarPlay is a little funky because it's a lot like the watch apps will be, which is you're actually building an app that lives inside your iPhone app or your iPad app, and it kind of displays itself over on your car display. So all the development is still happening in the same environment that you're building your iPhone app, your iPad app. And that's kind of been Apple's way of doing things. I haven't honestly worked with Tesla's things at all because I think that's still pretty proprietary at this point. But I don't think we're too far out from the point at which I could see someone sticking an iPad in the middle of your car and saying that thing's hot swappable. So if they come out with a new iPad in yours, you can pop it right in there and then run any information on there. So it's kind of funky because it's, like I said, it's a lot of proprietary stuff still. But things like CarPlay are certainly shaking things up because it's allowing, us in this room who aren't necessarily in the automotive industry to start getting our content in that area. And that's pretty enticing.
Okay, I have a question from one of our online students. What's some career advice you would give your 20-year-old self?
I think I've been watching a few of the Hall of Fame streams here, and I think everyone's pointing to fear. Like, don't let that overtake, your confidence in doing things. I'd say, like, years back, whenever I'd have to create, like, an image slider or a modal or something, I just thought that was, like, I don't know how to do that. Like, can someone else do it for me, or, like, try and find some example? But really, just breaking it down into little bits and pieces and just, working through each little step as you go. Don't be afraid to do that. There's tons of resources that you can learn from. I'd say try and understand the code that you might be copying and pasting. Just getting the most knowledge and understanding as you can from things, and give it a shot. A lot of the time, if I'm interviewing someone and I give them a test to do, it's not about them accomplishing it 100%, but being able to see how far they got. And the main thing I want is to know how they were thinking through solving the task. It's a lot like math class, show your work and you'll get some credit. So,
I guess, kind of looking back at I think for me, I wish that I built better habits in my work and the tools that I use to do that work. In the sense that, when I was in school, I had a lot of fun and I went very quickly through things, but I didn't necessarily build good habits in, say, like automating simple tasks or really taking the time to understand my IDE or editor. So there are developers out there, and I catch myself worrying sometimes, like, I'll repeat tasks over and over and over that are tedious. I'll go into terminal and I'll do it by hand instead of taking the time to, say, write a shell script that will do it for me. So when I encounter developers who do that, like, as their first step, they're like, oh, I did this and then I wrote the automation shell script. Like, as they go, they eventually become faster and faster and faster and faster than I am, because I'm still sitting there like, oh, I just know this like one thing and I know it works and I can do it. So I wish 20-year-old me, or I guess 26, because that's when I came here, was a little smarter in that regard. And like, take the time that you have here. Like, college is fun. It's great. Like, go drink and do a whole bunch of other stuff. That's fine. But also
20. 20.
20.
Yeah.
Sorry, 20-year-old me. Well, 26-year-old me,
Yeah,
I guess.
You're a bad influence.
But take the time to like, you don't have to charge through. You can set some really good habits for yourself while you're here that you'll lean on later.
For me, I mentioned this a little earlier, but the place I was before Big Cartel, Happy Cog, in the Philadelphia office, when you would walk in the front door, the first picture you would see hanging on the wall just said, work hard and be nice to people. And I've always liked that as, because now, a couple years in, I think about that and I look back and I'm like, that was kind of the key, because, little conversations you have with people lead to very interesting areas. And you will think nothing of a little conversation that you've had, and you got to know somebody who led you to somebody else, who led you to somebody else, and led you to somebody else. And all of a sudden you're at, a place that you'd consider your dream job because of a conversation that you had 5 years ago or something like that. I mentioned to Burke earlier, I guess, Chris Burke, who's now the program director of web design, he was one of our design course teachers. And when I was in my final project, he somewhat bullied me into making my final project fully responsive, which was like, this was early days still. And I took a shot at just reaching out to Ethan Marcotte himself and say, hey, I'm working on responsive design and I kind of would like some feedback on this if you have time. And he's one of the most humble and gracious people I've ever met in my life. So he's like totally down to help out with that. Like we said, talk to people, they'll help. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of got to know him over the years, and I've had 3 conversations with him when I was, real young back then. And he introduced me to somebody else who introduced me to somebody else. And 5 steps later, I was at somewhere and I was like, this is pretty cool that these tiny little moments led here. So, be nice to the people you meet and make friends, and they'll always come back to help.
Well, at this moment, if we don't have any more questions, I'd like to thank you for coming, and for those who are joining us online also. And we'd like to thank our guests, Anthony, Eric, and Stephen, for coming out and sharing their knowledge with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Good.
I did just tell.
Nice meeting you in real life.
Yeah, man.
I've always seen him around. I was like looking at the panel like, oh, Ricky. Yeah, I always see him around on the line.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have another session that we're going to need to prepare for. So we're going to ask you guys to move out of the room.
I'm just going to hang around.
Please don't leave any